Welcome to the major regions of Egypt. Life in ancient Egypt was concentrated along the shores of the Nile and divided into two regions. Lower Egypt was situated on the Nile Delta near the Mediterranean, and Upper Egypt was at the south reaching into Africa. Due to its proximity to the Mediterranean, temperatures in Lower Egypt were less extreme than in Upper Egypt. Until 3100 BCE and the unification of Egypt, each region had its own pharaoh and crown. Lower Egypt's crown was red and marked with symbols of papyrus and bees. Upper Egypt's crown was white with symbols of lotus and sedge-grass. Both regions had competing major cities, most notably Memphis in Lower Egypt and Thebes in Upper Egypt. There were different religious cults in both regions, each worshipping their own major gods. Many of the temples were designed in such a way as to represent the two regions, and ceremonies often incorporated Upper and Lower Egypt in their rituals. Welcome to Bringer of Life, the River Nile. The ancient Egyptians called the dark fertile soil of the Nile the Black Lands, and the surrounding desert was referred to as the Red Lands. The dramatic difference of productive land opposed to barren desert had a deep influence on cultural ideology, mythology, and religion. The Nile determined much of Egyptian civilization. For example, the seasonal cycle of the Nile was so consistent that ancient Egyptians created their calendar around it. The flood season, or Akhet, was when the departing floodwaters left arable soil for crops. It was followed by the growing and harvesting seasons, known as Peret and Shemu. These regular seasons, along with abundant wildlife and rich soil, meant that Egypt's denizens were able to nourish themselves and ensure their country's strength in trade. The River Nile, flowing from the south to the north, neatly traversed through both Upper and Lower Egypt. All of Egypt's major cities were built along this narrow ribbon of life. Protected by mountain ranges and deserts which acted as natural barriers to enemies, and sustained by the Nile's plants and wildlife, Egyptian civilization enjoyed economic and cultural prosperity for over 4,000 years. Both ancient Egyptians and ancient Greeks referred to the Nile as the river in their respective languages. Stretching a distance of over 6,700 kilometers, the Nile is one of the longest rivers in the world. It flows south to north, spanning 11 countries. The River Nile originates in the region of the Great Subequatorial Lakes, including one of the largest in the world, Lake Victoria near Tanzania. The river flows through African equatorial forests, swamps, volcanic lands, steppes, and deserts, splitting apart for a while and picking up various sediments from each region and carrying them all the way to Egypt. Its main artery, known as the White Nile, rejoins with the Blue Nile in Khartoum. This is where it weaves through rich deposits of silt and nutrients, carrying them along in its wake. The Nile crosses 6 cataracts from the south to the north, creating natural obstacles between the various sections of the river. The cataracts are long zones of about 100 kilometers, where the bubbling and rapidly swirling waters advance tumultuously amid enormous heaps of rocks and benches of hard stone. It is after crossing Nubia and the first cataract that the river officially returns to Egypt in Aswan. There are still 1,000 kilometers before it reaches Cairo and the Delta, bringing life to those living on its shores before it eventually empties into the Mediterranean Sea. Ancient Egyptian irrigation and water use was centered around the Nile. However, they also had access to streams and rivers, as well as several large lakes. The Delta, situated at the north end of the Nile, also known as Lower Egypt, is a large irrigated area where the river splits into several tributaries. The Delta had several major brackish coastal lakes, bodies of water separated from the sea by thin strips of land. A mix of deep to shallow waters, salt swamps, and sand plains, these lakes were refuge to a wealth of species, as well as water and land plants. The occasional bandit could also be found sheltering within the denser reeds, waiting for the unwary traveler. Welcome to Deserts of Egypt. Reaching out on either side of the lush Nile are the harsh, arid Western Desert and the mountainous Eastern Desert. They cover nearly 94% of Egypt. Each of these parent deserts have their own microclimate and contain several smaller deserts with a distinctive fauna and flora. Whale fossils were discovered within the depths of the Sahara. Known as the Valley of the Whales, this location is evidence of the seas which once covered the area. The White Desert in the northeast of the Sahara owes its name to its white limestone soil, contrasting with the yellow sand. The wind has eroded the rocks of the White Desert into stone mushrooms, the most famous of which is referred to as the finger of God.
Whoa! Whoa!
The Great Sand Sea is a large unbroken desert that reaches out through western Egypt and eastern Libya. It is home to a unique geological formation known as Libyan silica glass. The pale yellowish-green material ranges from pebble-sized fragments to glass rocks the size of rough boulders. Welcome to the Qattara Depression. The Qattara Depression is located in the northwest part of Egypt. Reaching 18,000 square kilometers, the basin is 133 meters below sea level and covered with salt. It is the second lowest point in Africa, after the Afar Depression. The climate is very arid, with average temperatures reaching 36 degrees Celsius. The famous Siwa Oasis is located on the protected southwestern region. Today, the Qattara Depression is utilized for oil exploration. Welcome to Siwa.
Whoa!
Oasis is in the western. Geographically, the Siwan Oasis is located in a depression 20 meters below sea level. Its natural springs and warm climate aided in the bountiful production of date trees. Though clearly influenced to some degree by Egyptian and African culture, the area's isolation resulted in a unique society and language. While they worshipped the same deities, Siwan temple architecture differed from traditional Egyptian temples. Old Kingdom Egyptians referred to the oasis as cauldron, due to its unique geographical structure. Oases were crucial for nomadic tribes and caravans. Without them, there was no chance of survival in an otherwise harsh landscape. As such, oases quickly became hubs for trade, as well as areas of political control.
Whoa!
Because of the dry climate, there is very little rainfall to sustain the oases. Instead, underground rivers flood the natural basins. Since many oases have a north-south orientation parallel to the Nile, some geologists suggest they were once tributaries of the mighty river. There is evidence that ancient Egyptians attempted to create some oases.
Whoa!
Libyan oases are the best known, as they are geographically and culturally linked to the Nile Valley and the Delta. These western oases have a distinct geology from the other regions of Egypt. The most famous and important oases are Karga, Dakhla, Farafra, Baharia, and Siwa.
Whoa!
The Spring of the Sun is one of many thermal sources in Siwa, with the particularity that Cleopatra would have bathed in this one, giving it its name. The presence of the source beneath was attested already by Herodotus during the 5th century BCE, when the oasis was called Amuneion by the Greeks of Cyrene.
Whoa!
Oracles predicted the future, delivered omens that could be more or less obscure, and offered divine guidance. The Siwan oracle was considered one of the 3 greatest of the ancient world, alongside the oracles of Delphi and Dodoni. Because of the Greek colonies in Cyrenaica, the temple associated Amun. It is made the perilous journey to Siwa in order to consult the oracle, emulating the actions of mythical heroes such as Hercules and Perseus. This action earned the approval of the oracle, who validated his claim as pharaoh of Egypt. He was confirmed as the son of Amun, conferring upon him the most legitimate claim to date of all Egypt's foreign invaders.
Whoa!
The powerful and the rich would send gifts or travel great distances in order to ensure their good fortune by gaining the blessing of the Oracle of Siwa. Every successful blessing only increased the soothsayer's prestige. Runner Eubotus, a famous citizen of Cyrene, consulted the oracle in order to know if he would win the 93rd Olympic Games race in 408 BCE. He did, enhancing the standing of the Siwan oracle in the process.
Whoa!
The Temple of the Oracle of Amun was built in the 6th century BCE by Pharaoh Amasis. In the game, its entrance is guarded by ram-headed sphinxes, the animal representing Amun. They were inspired by similar statuary located at the British Museum. Another option would have a Greek-influenced representation of Zeus Amun, a human-headed sphinx with horns. This representation of Zeus Amun was very popular in Siwa.
Welcome to the Fayum. The Fayum Oasis is an enormous basin in the western desert that formed from the Nile's overflow. As such, it is not considered a true oasis, though it gives its name to the region, which covers Lake Moeris. The oasis harbors some of the oldest archaeological artifacts of the region, indicating that the area has been inhabited by hunters and gatherers since the Neolithic period. The Fayum Oasis drains into Lake Moeris, which was a large freshwater lake, but at some time became a saltwater lake. In the 12th dynasty, ancient Egyptians redirected the water flow with a dam and dug a supply canal using the lake as their reservoir. Irrigation enabled them to continue growing crops of figs, grapes, and olives year-round. Reed boats, feluccas, triremes, and kerkeros were the most commonly found craft within the landlocked waters of Egypt. They were used for various purposes, ranging from daily fishing, trade, warfare, and travel, to the ferrying of massive stone blocks used to build the great monuments of Egypt. The most impressive pyramids of ancient Egypt date from the Old Kingdom and can be found on the sites of Giza, Saqqara, and Dashur. However, one particularly famous pyramid of the time is located elsewhere. During the Middle Kingdom, some pharaohs chose the Fayum as their final resting place. One such ruler was Amenemhat III. His pyramid left a mark on the imagination of antique chroniclers. They refer to it as the Labyrinth, mostly due to the vast mortuary temple complex at the foot of the pyramid. Herodotus mentioned that he had visited 12 courts and over 3,000 of its chambers. But he was also well known for being prone to hyperbole. Amenemhat's pyramid was built with a brick core and covered with stone slabs, designed to be impenetrable. The burial chamber, made out of a single block of sandstone, is unique in its design. Richard Lepsius and Flinders Petrie both explored the pyramid site, measuring 385 meters by 158 meters, and identified it as the location of the labyrinth. Their research conditions were difficult, as most of the site had been submerged by the nearby canal. Furthermore, the stones from the complex and the outer casing of the pyramid had been quarried away long ago. Ubisoft decided to give life back to this lost monument and the many crypts that were said to be devoted to the sacred crocodile god, Sobek. Founded during the 5th dynasty, the site was popular during the 12th dynasty under the name of Shedet. During the Ptolemaic era, the metropolis was named Crocodilopolis by the Greeks, in honor of the crocodile god Sobek. During the Greco-Roman era, the Cleruks, soldiers of the Ptolemies, settled there after their military service and expanded the irrigation systems. Irrigation and water distribution tripled the arable land and turned the city into a lush and rich area. 27,000 inhabitants lived in its precinct at its height. The city's location was strategic in controlling the many small waterways connecting to the main canal, and thus the Nile.
Whoa.
The region's main cult was that of Sobek of Shedet, a divinity associated with water and fertility, both very important to an area that depended on irrigation. Many local villages had the title Town of Sobek added to their official designations. During festivals, ancient Egyptians recited hymns to Sobek, asking for his divine intervention. Greek settlers and later Romans would help the Temple of Sobek's economy to flourish by adopting the local embalming mortuary rites. Their sarcophagi were beautifully painted and adorned with amazingly realistic portraits.
Whoa.
Very similar to the cult of the Apis bull in Memphis, a living crocodile was worshipped within the precinct of Crocodilopolis's main temple. Known as Sobek to the Egyptians and Sukkos to the Greeks, it was reported by Strabo that priests fed it with meat, wine, and honeyed milk. They covered its body with jewels and gold. After its death, it was embalmed and placed within the crocodile's grotto, alongside thousands of other mummified crocodiles. Welcome to the city of Memphis.
Whoa.
Throughout all ancient Egyptian periods, cities had one thing in common. They were situated along the Nile's shores. Cities were often designated for government or for worship. Major cities had several temples dedicated to numerous gods and goddesses. Egyptians referred to the organization of their cities as a sepat, or later on by the Persian term nome. There were 20 sepat in Lower Egypt and 22 in Upper Egypt. The capital city of ancient Egypt changed many times over the periods.
Whoa.
One of the largest was Memphis, located in Lower Egypt. It was a key center for religious temples, including their most important deity, Ptah, god of creation. Thebes, located in Upper Egypt, competed with Memphis and featured as both a political and a religious center. Two important temples, Luxor and Karnak, were built there. A minor capital of the Sayyid dynasty was the city of Sais. This was the last native Egyptian capital of Egypt.
Whoa.
During the Third Dynasty, under Pharaoh Djoser, Memphis became the first religious and administrative capital of Egypt. Even when the political capital of Egypt decentralized itself, pharaohs were crowned in this sacred city in order to legitimize their ascension to the throne, up to and including Alexander the Great. Though little remains today save ruins south of Cairo, we can guess at the structure of the city, which stretched up to 5 kilometers in length and 2 kilometers in width.
Whoa.
Memphis was also referred to as the City with the 100 Doors, or the White Walls. These names were in reference to the wall which surrounded the city. Under the protection of Ptah, god of craftsmen, the city was a thriving religious and economic hub.
Whoa.
Welcome to Rediscovering Egypt.
Whoa.
In the 19th century, the increased intensity of tourism and excavations, as well as the outflow of antiquities to other countries, threatened Egypt's archaeological heritage. Egyptians took part in this destruction by ransacking sites for artifacts to sell, quarrying stones from ancient monuments, and removing sebak, ancient mud bricks, to reuse for their own purposes.
Whoa.
A major step in conserving Egypt's heritage was taken in 1858, when the Viceroy of Egypt created the Antiquities Service. Supported by a team of foreign scholars, Auguste Mariette exerted an iron grip on the service. He carried out his work across Egypt and into Nubia, intervening on almost every major site. Aware of the necessity of keeping unearthed artifacts in Egypt, Mariette requested a museum be created for that purpose in 1858. This museum was the ancestor of the Egyptian Museum.
Whoa.
Sto Maspero, Mariette's successor, expanded and reorganized the Antiquities Service and instigated laws regulating the export of artifacts. French scholars ran the service until it passed into Egyptian hands in the 1950s. As of the mid-19th century, Egyptology was fast becoming a recognized discipline within both private institutions and learned societies.
Whoa.
A French architect, archaeologist, and former researcher, Jean-Claude Golvin, now specializes in the artistic reconstruction of ancient cities and monuments. To date, he has created more than 800 drawings, which include 3 volumes focusing on the reconstitution of ancient Egypt. His work is exquisitely detailed and can be found in books and museums around the world. The team was thrilled to collaborate with Jean-Claude Golvin in order to recreate Egypt for the game. In the 19 exclusive watercolors he created for the team, Golvin used scientific data as the base, and then extrapolated to provide a full interpretation of various locations and monuments in ancient Egypt. Both early sketches and fully rendered images were then used by the team as references while building the world of Assassin's Creed Origins.
Whoa.
Although ancient Egypt's rich religious culture and its mortuary monuments continue to be investigated, the modern discipline of Egyptology has shifted focus. Rather than single-mindedly retrieving impressive artifacts, Egyptologists today focus instead on increasing the body of knowledge. In the past, excavations took place in the field, and while that is still the case today, much of the work on Egyptology now takes place in libraries and archives. Today, archaeology in Egypt relies on an interdisciplinary approach, where traditional Egyptologists are helped by a wide spectrum of scientists from other disciplines and new non-invasive techniques. GPS data, satellite imaging, and ground-penetrating radar allow archaeologists to gain a sense of what lies underneath the ground before excavating.
Welcome to Natron,
Whoa.
Natron is a colorless salt that was used by ancient Egyptians for food preservation, cleansing products, and glassmaking. It was also used in the mummification process. During the ceremonial embalmment ritual, the priests packed the body in natron in order to remove all of the moisture. Once the body was thoroughly desiccated, they could begin the wrapping.
Whoa.
Natron was mined in Wadi Natron. The main mining methods involved either cutting slices out of the lake bed when it was dry, or raking through mineral-saturated water to gather the mineral salts during the floods.
Whoa.
Both techniques are still used today and inspired the team in their mountains northwest of Memphis. Welcome to Fauna of Ancient Egypt. Both domesticated and wild animals were features in ancient Egyptian bas-reliefs as early as the First Dynasty. While the variety of wildlife served as a reliable food source, it also influenced both culture and mythology.
Whoa.
Egypt's terrain allowed for a diverse range of animals, including panthers, rhinoceroses, elephants, and many variations of antelopes. The Nile was home to many species of fish, along with hippopotami and crocodiles.
Whoa.
The wide variety of birds that populated the riverbanks, from raptors and waterfowl to songbirds, were all cataloged within Egyptian hieroglyphic signs. Encounters with reptiles and insects, such as cobras, scorpions, and scarabs, influenced hieroglyphs and art.
Whoa.
While all animals had sacred meanings, lions in particular represented power and royalty to ancient Egyptians. They were so prized by pharaohs that they were hunted to extinction within Egypt. Welcome to Flora of Ancient. The climate and unique geography of the Nile Delta offered a wide variety of plant species. Many of these plants served as sustenance for ancient Egyptians and as crops for trade. The Nile's consistent seasons allowed Egypt to sustain itself for centuries. Was the papyrus. This tall sedge plant grew in abundance along the water's edge of the Nile. Commonly known for its use as paper, the ancient Egyptians found many other functions for it, including rope, sandals, and mats. Papyriform boats made from the plant are seen in paintings and reliefs, and were used in ritualistic ceremonies.
Whoa!
There were many types of trees along the River Nile, such as the date palm, carob, and tamarisk. The earliest fruit tree cultivated was the fig tree, followed by apple, pomegranate, and eventually olive trees during the era of the New Kingdom. Mango cultivation was the result of a late import from Asia during the Middle Ages.
Whoa!
Some trees were associated with gods, such as the acacia with Horus. The divinities Thoth and Seshat were depicted inscribing the reign of the king into a persea tree. The sycamore was connected with the goddess Iset, patron of the ritual of life.
Whoa!
Welcome to Ancient Egyptian Hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphics were used as sacred writing, appearing on monuments, statues, and sacred papyrus texts. The earliest symbols that resemble hieroglyphs were on pottery dating back to 4000 BCE. This stylized form of signs and drawings was the only writing used from its ancient origins to the end of pharaonic history. Ancient Egyptians referred to hieroglyphs as the writing of the gods.
Whoa!
Considered a difficult language, it was intended for pharaohs, nobility, and priests, and meant to be used in ceremonies, within tombs, and for government records. Since few Egyptians were able to read the ancient hieroglyphs, the mythological aura around the language was persistent, even in their own culture.
Whoa!
The structure of hieroglyphs offers insight into Egyptian culture, not just in what the translations say, but in the structure of the symbols themselves. They were found on tomb walls, on sarcophagi, on statues, and on pottery, and were meticulously recorded in countless ancient papyri.
Whoa!
Would perform rituals and daily offerings. These were accompanied by hieroglyphs used as spells. In tomb paintings, the hieroglyphs are represented with formulas to recite. These spoken words were meant to be spells which would allow the deceased to benefit from the offerings for all eternity. Spells and offerings were also written for the living, to enhance medicines and cure illnesses.
Whoa!
The most famous of ancient Egyptian documents is the Book of the Dead. Written in hieroglyphs and hieratic texts, it depicts important spells and rituals. These spells were intended to ensure a smooth transition from life to death and allow the deceased to safely navigate the perils of the afterlife.
Whoa!
Even after it was deciphered, the reading of hieroglyphs remained difficult at times due to the many directions in which they can be read. Depending on the orientation of the signs, hieroglyphs can be read left to right, right to left, horizontally or vertically, though never bottom to top. A clue on which way to read is to first notice which direction the figurative signs are facing. If a pictogram is looking to the right, then the reader is meant to start from the right and read towards the figure. Column text on a papyrus begins from the right, then goes top to bottom for each column. Text written on tomb walls resembles the structure of a page from a comic book. The text can be placed in front, behind, or above the character, and its symbols look in the same direction as the character. Another clue is that the name of a god or hieroglyphs meaning gods or kings are always written before the descriptive text. Compared to alphabetical languages, Egyptian hieroglyphs have more symbols. Confronted with the absence of vowels, the Egyptians invented a category of signs. When placed at the end of words, these signs help inform its meaning. For instance, a drawing of a lion will refer to a lion and also relate to the abstract concept of a lion as something dangerous or powerful. Middle Egyptian hieroglyphs contained a little more than 700 signs. By the end of the Greco-Roman period, there were 10,000 signs. Egyptologist Sir Alan Gardner created a list classifying common hieroglyphic signs and their variants. Ancient Egyptian languages have many similarities with Asian and African languages. They have evolved in similar ways to the various forms of written Egyptian. These languages belong to the Hamito-Semitic group. There were 5 clear evolutions in the Egyptian language, each with their own distinctive structure. These languages are known as Old Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian, Demotic, and Coptic. Coptic. While hieroglyphs and hieratic script give us an idea as to how the ancient Egyptian language was structured and written, the way it was spoken is still up for debate. The team opted for English as the spoken language, with the characters using ancient Egyptian and Greek words and accents. The language that is spoken in the background by the crowds is largely based on Sir Alan Gardner's Egyptian grammar. To help resurrect a dead language, we consulted Egyptologists and dialogue coaches to establish our target sound and cast actors with Arabic, Hebraic, and African backgrounds to bring the game to life. After Alexander the Great's arrival in Egypt and the establishment of his reign, Greek became the language used by the governing bodies. The inability to read hieroglyphs caused resentment among the Greek population. It's from this tension that the Rosetta Stone was created. The spread of Christianity ended pharaonic culture and resulted in the destruction of its pagan monuments. This also marked the end of hieroglyphic writing and understanding. Welcome to Jean-Francois. Between the 5th century CE and the Renaissance, knowledge of hieroglyphs was entirely lost. Many enthusiasts tackled the challenge of deciphering the language with little success. Some groundwork was made with various researchers identifying names and some grammatical structure, and confirming that cartouches were markers for royal names. They were still missing a critical piece of information that would eventually be revealed thanks to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone.
Whoa.
The Rosetta Stone was found in 1799 by Bouchard, a soldier in Napoleon's army. The stela dates from 196 BCE, written in ancient Egyptian and Greek with 3 scripts: hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Greek alphabet. Following the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1801, the English took possession of the stone. It has been at the British Museum since 1802 and remains the most visited object of the museum to date.
Whoa.
The first translation was of the Greek section only in 1803. It detailed a decree of Pharaoh Ptolemy V, reminding the citizens that their pharaoh had led Egypt to prosperity. It was fully translated 20 years after by Jean-François Champollion, who was working with a facsimile.
Whoa!
Through his studies of the stone, Champollion was able to make a critical observation that would unlock the whole mystery, that hieroglyphics were not only ideograms, but also phonograms. Hieroglyphs consist of phonetic glyphs, single characters, and logograms. Essentially, they are a combination of phonetics, alphabet, and full words, which in total form a language.
Whoa!
While studying the stone, Champollion realized that there was a difference in the number of hieroglyphic characters in relation to the number of Greek characters for the same word. This led him to believe that hieroglyphs must have phonetic characteristics. This was the first step to unlocking the Rosetta Stone's secrets.
Whoa!
To prove this theory, Champollion began identifying Egyptian rulers' names and then compared their phonetic pronunciation to the Greek version. For example, Cheops had been the Greek name given by ancient chroniclers to the owner of the Great Pyramid, Khufu.
Whoa!
The next step for Champollion was to confirm that his approach was verifiable by using the Philae obelisk as an additional reference. Engraved in the obelisk are two inscriptions in Egyptian hieroglyphs and Greek. Once he confirmed the names of Ptolemy and Cleopatra within these texts and confirmed the same phonetic patterns as on the Rosetta Stone, Champollion knew he was on the right track.
Whoa!
Champollion had already mastered several ancient languages when he took on deciphering the Rosetta Stone. He used his knowledge of Coptic to identify the solar disk hieroglyph on the obelisk as the phonetic translation of Ra. Further translation only strengthened his conclusion. Egyptian hieroglyphs encompass the alphabet in both phonetics and determinative ways, which means that the symbol represents the word itself.